Nathaniel Avery had crossed the Sierra Nevada 6 times as a mountain guide. When a Washoe elder warned about early snow on October 20th, 1847, pride made him ignore it to save 3 days. Now his 47 settlers were trapped at 7,000 feet, temperatures 20 below, with 2 weeks of food that had to last until April. 32 adults, 15 children, 120 days ahead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Washoe elder had appeared at their camp 3 days before the pass, his weathered face reading the sky like Nathaniel read maps. He spoke through a young interpreter, pointing at the thin, high clouds that most travelers would ignore. Birds leave early this year, deer already in valley. Sky has winter color. Nathaniel had listened politely, nodding at the old man's concern, but his mind was already calculating the days saved by pushing through. 3 days meant arriving in Sacramento before November, beating the rush of late-season wagon trains competing for winter work. 3 days meant families would have roofs over their heads before the real cold hit the valley below. He'd cross these mountains in early November before without incident. "I appreciate the warning," Nathaniel told the interpreter, "but we've planned this carefully. We'll be through the pass in 2 days, down in the valley in 4. The elder had looked at him with something like pity. He said something in Washoe that the interpreter hesitated to translate. Finally, the young man spoke. He says the mountains do not care about your plans. Now, standing in that perfect valley with the first snowflakes beginning to fall, Nathaniel felt those words like a blade between his ribs. The valley had seemed ideal when they arrived at dusk. A wide meadow ringed by pine forest, a creek running through the center, good grass for the oxen, sheltered on 3 sides by rising slopes. "We'll camp here tonight," he'd announced. "Rest the animals. Hit the pass fresh in the morning." But morning never came. Not the morning he'd planned for. The snow started gently, fat flakes drifting down in the twilight as families set up their evening camps. Children caught snowflakes on their tongues, laughing. It was October in the mountains. A dusting of snow was normal, even pretty. By midnight, 4 inches covered the ground. By dawn, 8 inches had fallen and the sky showed no sign of clearing. Nathaniel stood outside his wagon in the gray morning light, watching the solid wall of clouds sitting on the mountains. The pass they needed to cross was invisible, swallowed by white. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees overnight. His breath came out in thick clouds that hung in the still air. James Porter, his second in command, in the closest thing he had to a friend in the train, trudged through the snow to join him. Porter was a Presbyterian minister with a practical streak, one of the few men who'd questioned Nathaniel's decisions when it mattered. He didn't say anything, just stood beside Nathaniel, both of them staring at where the pass should be. "It'll clear," Nathaniel said, not believing it. "Maybe," Porter replied. "And if it doesn't?" Nathaniel didn't answer. He was thinking about the Washoe elder's face, that look of pity. The mountains do not care about your plans. The snow fell for 3 more days without stopping. Not the gentle dusting Nathaniel had convinced himself would pass, but heavy wet snow that accumulated faster than seemed possible. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, wagons sat buried to their axles. The oxen huddled together under makeshift shelters, their breath steaming in air that had dropped to 15 degrees. Nathaniel called a meeting of the family heads on the evening of day 3. 17 men gathered in the largest wagon, cramped together, their faces lit by a single lantern. Outside, the snow kept falling. "We need to talk about supplies," Nathaniel began, pulling out the ledger where he tracked their provisions since Independence, Missouri. "I've done an inventory with Porter. We have flour, salt, pork, beans, coffee, enough for 2 weeks if we were moving, but we're not moving." "How long do we wait?" Thomas Grant asked. He was a blacksmith from Ohio, strong as his trade required, with a wife and 2 teenage sons. "Another day. 2. We wait until it stops snowing and the pass clears enough to travel," Nathaniel said. "And if it doesn't stop?" Sarah Mills spoke up from the back. She was one of only 3 women who attended these meetings, a widow with 4 children under 10. Her voice carried an edge that made men uncomfortable. "My children are asking questions I don't have answers for." Nathaniel met her eyes. "The pass will clear, It has to. This is early for snow this heavy, but it's still October. We'll get a break in the weather. You told us that yesterday, Grant said, and the day before. The silence in the wagon was broken only by the wind outside and the soft patter of snow hitting canvas. Nathaniel felt the weight of 17 pairs of eyes on him. These people had paid him, trusted him, followed him 2,000 miles based on his reputation as a man who knew these mountains. Porter cleared his throat. There's another option. We could try the southern route. It adds 5 days, but it stays lower. Less snow. Through 3 feet of snow with buried wagons. Grant shook his head. We'd lose half the oxen before we made 10 miles. So we wait, said Henry Winters, the camp's physician. He was 56, the oldest man in the train, with steady hands and a calm that people found reassuring. We ration what we have. We wait for clear weather. What else can we do? What else can we do? The question hung in the lamplight like an accusation. We start rationing now, Nathaniel said. Today. Not full rations. 3/4 rations for adults, full for children. We hunt if the weather breaks. We melt snow for water to save firewood. We prepare for 2 weeks of waiting. And if it's longer than 2 weeks, Sarah Mills asked. Nathaniel looked down at his ledger, at the numbers he'd calculated a dozen times, hoping they'd change. They never did. Then we adjust. But it won't be. This snow has to stop. Outside, the temperature dropped to 10 degrees. The snow kept falling. On the morning of day 11, the snow finally stopped. Nathaniel woke to silence so complete it felt unnatural after the constant whisper of falling snow. He pushed open the canvas flap of his wagon and stared at a world transformed into something alien and hostile. 6 feet of snow covered the valley floor. Drifts against the wagons reached twice that height. The pass they needed to cross was buried under what looked like a solid white wall, climbing toward a sky that was, finally, brutally clear and blue. He pulled on every piece of clothing he owned and climbed down into snow that came up to his chest. The cold hit him like a physical blow. His breath froze in his beard before he'd taken 10 steps. Around the camp, other men were emerging, their faces showing the same dawning horror he felt. Porter reached him first, floundering through the deep snow. Nathaniel, we need to try the pass. Now, before another storm. Get Grant and the Miller brothers. And axes. We're going up. It took them 2 hours to cover what should have been a 20-minute walk. 5 men, all experienced outdoorsmen, all in their prime, struggling through snow that sometimes gave way beneath them and sometimes held their weight without warning. Nathaniel led, breaking trail, his legs burning with effort after the first 100 yards. They reached the mouth of the pass at noon. What they found killed the last of Nathaniel's hope. The pass wasn't blocked. It was gone. Where there should have been a narrow defile between 2 peaks, there was instead a slope of snow rising at an impossible angle, packed and compressed by wind into something almost solid. Nathaniel stared up at it, trying to estimate the height. 40 feet, maybe 50. And beyond that, more snow filling what should have been the path through the mountains. Jesus Christ, Grant breathed. Nathaniel started climbing. He made it 15 feet up the snow wall before his boots lost purchase, and he slid back down. He tried again, using his axe to chop footholds. Got 20 feet this time before the snow gave way. He landed hard, the wind knocked out of him. Nathaniel, stop! Porter grabbed his arm. Look at it. Even if we got over this, there's miles more. We can't do it. Not with families, not with children. We have to. Nathaniel pulled free, chest heaving. We can't stay here until April. Can't or won't doesn't change what is. Porter's voice was gentle but firm. The pass is closed. We're trapped. The 5 men stood in the shadow of that massive wall of snow. The sun bright and cold above them. The valley spread out below, looking peaceful and deadly. Nathaniel felt something break inside him. Some last piece of denial shattering against reality. They were trapped at 7,000 feet with winter just beginning. 2 weeks of food, 47 souls, and no way out. The walk back to camp took 3 hours. Nobody spoke. Nathaniel's mind was running calculations he didn't want to finish. 240 pounds of flour, 180 pounds of salt pork, 40 pounds of beans, 20 pounds of coffee. 47 people eating three-quarter rations meant the food would last 18 days. Maybe 20 if they cut rations again. April was 5 months away, minimum. When they reached camp, families were gathered around fires, melting snow for water. The children were playing in the drifts, building forts, their laughter carrying across the valley. They didn't understand yet. Nathaniel envied them that. His wife Rebecca met him at their wagon. She took one look at his face and knew. How bad? We're not getting out, not until spring. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once. She'd crossed the plains beside him, nursed sick children, buried her mother in Kansas. She was 42 years old and had survived things that would have broken weaker people. Then we survived winter. What do you need from me? I need you to help me tell them. They gathered everyone in the center of camp an hour before sunset. All 47 settlers, from old Samuel Weber, who was 72, down to the Morrison infant, who wasn't yet walking. Nathaniel stood on a wagon tongue so everyone could see him. The pass is closed, he said. It's not blocked, it's buried. We're staying here until the spring thaw. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Sarah Mills spoke. How long? April, maybe May. And the food? Nathaniel met her eyes. 3 weeks at current rations. We'll need to hunt, trap, forage. There's nothing to forage in 6 feet of snow, Grant said. Then we hunt, we conserve, we ration harder. Nathaniel's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. We survive. Samuel Weber died on the morning of November 5th. He'd been complaining of chest pains for 2 days, but Dr. Winters had no medicine to give him, nothing but words of comfort that meant nothing in the face of a failing heart. The old man went to sleep in his daughter's wagon and simply didn't wake up. They tried to dig a grave. 6 men with shovels and axes attacked the frozen ground for 4 hours, managing to chip out a hole barely 2 feet deep. The earth was frozen solid, harder than rock, and the effort exhausted them in ways that scared Nathaniel. These were strong men, farmers and laborers, and 4 hours of digging had left them trembling and weak. Porter conducted the service. 23 days trapped in the valley, and this was their first death. Everyone knew it wouldn't be the last. They stood in a circle around the shallow grave, breath steaming in air that was 5 degrees above zero, while Porter read from Psalms. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Nathaniel barely heard the words. He was watching the faces around him, hollow eyes, sunken cheeks. The physical signs of starvation were already visible on everyone, even the children. They'd been on quarter rations for 10 days now, and hunting had yielded exactly 2 rabbits and 1 grouse. 3 pounds of meat split among 47 people. After the service, Grant pulled him aside. We need to talk, not here. They walked to the edge of camp, far enough that voices wouldn't carry. Grant was a big man, 6'2", and naturally heavy, but he'd lost weight fast. His coat hung loose on a frame that was starting to look gaunt. Some of us have been talking, Grant said, about the bodies. Nathaniel felt his stomach drop. No. Just listen. Samuel's body is frozen. The others, when they die, they'll freeze too. We could... No. Nathaniel's voice was flat and hard. We don't cross that line. We're starving, Nathaniel. My boys are starving. You see their faces. They're eating 3 ounces of flour a day mixed with melted snow. That's not food. That's dying slow. Then we hunt more. We find something. Anything. But we don't do that. Grant's jaw tightened. You brought us here. Your pride. Your decision. Now you're going to tell us what we can't do to survive. The accusation hung between them like a blade. Nathaniel had no answer because Grant was right. He had brought them here. Every death, every empty stomach, every child crying from hunger. That was his weight to carry. I know what I did, Nathaniel said quietly. I live with it every second. But if we cross that line, what are we surviving for? What's the point of making it to spring if we lose our humanity getting there? Grant stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked away. But Nathaniel knew the conversation wasn't over. It was just delayed. When people got hungry enough, desperate enough, they'd have this talk again. and he didn't know if he'd be able to stop them. Rebecca told him about the baby on November 12th. They were alone in their wagon, the canvas walls doing almost nothing to keep out cold that had dropped to 12 below. Nathaniel was checking their personal food stores, half a pound of flour, 2 ounces of salt pork, nothing else, when she spoke. "I'm pregnant." His hand stopped moving. He turned to look at her, this woman he'd been married to for 19 years, and saw the fear in her eyes mixed with something else. Defiance, maybe, or hope. "How long?" 3 months, maybe 4. "I wasn't sure at first, with the travel and the rationing, but I'm sure now." Nathaniel did the math automatically. 3 months meant she'd conceived in August, somewhere on the trail through Nevada. 4 months pregnant now. That put the birth in late May, maybe June. If they survived that long. If she survived that long. A woman needed 3,000 calories a day while pregnant. Rebecca was eating maybe 400. "Say something," Rebecca said. "I don't know what to say. A baby, here, now. I know the timing is terrible, but Nathaniel, this baby is due in spring. After the thaw, after we're out of here. This baby is proof we're going to make it." He wanted to believe that, wanted to see it the way she did, as a promise of survival instead of another impossible burden. But all he could think about was her body trying to grow a child while starving, the impossible mathematics of keeping both of them alive. "You need more food, Hauerschutting," he said. "We all need more food." "No, I mean you specifically for the baby. Dr. Winters needs to know. We'll adjust your rations." "From what?" Rebecca's voice was sharp. "We're all starving, Nathaniel. You can't give me more without taking from someone else. Some other mother. Some child." She was right, and he hated it. The ledger was clear. They had maybe 12 pounds of flour left, 8 pounds of salt pork, no beans, no coffee. That was it. Divided among 46 people, they had 3 days of quarter rations remaining. 3 days, and then nothing. "We'll hunt tomorrow," Nathaniel said. "I'll take the best shots. We'll find something." "You said that yesterday, and the day before. Tomorrow will be different." Rebecca reached across the wagon and took his hand. Her fingers were ice cold despite the gloves. "I'm not telling you this to add to your burden. I'm telling you because you need to know we have something to fight for. Not just survival, new life. Promise me you'll fight for that." "I promise." That night, Nathaniel lay awake in the dark, listening to the wind scream across the valley. Somewhere out there in 6 feet of snow, there had to be game. Deer driven down from higher elevations. Maybe elk. Something. He'd been a hunter his whole life, had provided meat for his family through lean years before. He could do it again. He had to. Because in 6 months, if they were still alive, there would be 47 people in this camp again. And one of them would be a newborn who'd never asked to be born into this frozen hell. The hunting party left at dawn on November 13th. Nathaniel, Porter, Grant, and the Miller brothers. 5 of the strongest men left, though none of them were strong anymore. They'd each eaten 2 ounces of flour mixed with hot water for breakfast. Not enough to sustain a child, let alone men about to spend a day breaking trail through deep snow. They carried the 3 rifles in camp and moved east, toward the tree line where Nathaniel had seen deer tracks 3 weeks ago. The tracks would be long buried now, but deer had to shelter somewhere, had to eat. The aspens and willows near the creek would still have bark accessible above the snow line. 2 hours of walking, and they'd covered maybe half a mile. The snow was deep and unstable, sometimes holding their weight, sometimes collapsing and dropping them chest deep into powder. Each step required pulling one leg free and plunging it forward, over and over, the effort draining them faster than seemed possible. "Stop," Porter gasped. "Need to rest." They stood in a line, 5 men breathing hard, their breaths coming out in great clouds. Nathaniel looked back at their trail, a wandering line of post holes in otherwise pristine snow. Looking at it made him understand just how small they were, how insignificant against the vast white expanse surrounding them. "There," Grant said, pointing. "Tracks. Fresh deer tracks, barely dusted with new snow. A single animal moving from the tree line down toward the creek." Nathaniel felt his heart kick. Fresh tracks meant the deer was close, maybe within rifle range if they moved carefully. They followed the tracks for another hour, moving slower now, trying to be quiet despite the impossible noise of crunching through snow. The tracks led them along the creek bed, between willows stripped of bark as high as a deer could reach standing on its hind legs. The deer was bedded down in a small depression where the willows grew thick. A doe, maybe 100 pounds. She saw them the same instant Nathaniel saw her. For one frozen moment they stared at each other, woman and men equally desperate to survive the winter. Grant raised his rifle. The deer exploded from her bed, bounding through the snow in great leaps that would have been graceful if they weren't so frantic. Grant fired, missed. The deer was already 50 yards away, plunging through drifts, and then she was gone into the timber. Damn it! Grant worked the bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge. Save it, Nathaniel said. She's gone. They stood in the churned snow where the deer had been, staring at the empty space. So close. 100 pounds of meat, enough to feed everyone for a week, maybe more, and now nothing. We keep going, Nathaniel said. For what? Porter's voice was flat. We don't have the strength for this. Look at us. We can barely walk. He was right. They'd been out for 3 hours and covered less than a mile. Their legs were shaking. Their breathing was labored. The cold was seeping through every layer of clothing they owned. 1 more hour, Nathaniel said. Then we head back. They hunted for another 90 minutes, found no more tracks, saw nothing, heard nothing but wind in the pines and their own labored breathing. When they finally turned back toward camp, the sun was already dropping toward the peaks, and the temperature was falling with it. They made it back to camp after dark, exhausted and empty-handed. The families were waiting, watching their faces for any sign of success. Nathaniel shook his head. Sarah Mills turned away without a word, her children pressing against her skirts. That night they ate the last of the salt pork, 2 ounces per adult, 3 for the children. In the morning, all they'd have left was flour, maybe enough for 4 more days. This story takes time to craft. If you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On November 18th, Emma Mills died. She was 6 years old, the second of Sarah's 4 children, and she'd been sick for 3 days with what Dr. Winters called pneumonia. There was nothing he could do. No medicine, no way to keep her warm enough, no food to give her body strength to fight. She died quietly in her mother's arms, just stopped breathing, and Sarah didn't make a sound. She just sat there holding her daughter's body, rocking back and forth, her face completely blank. They buried Emma next to Samuel Weber. The ground was even harder now, frozen deeper, and it took 8 men a full day to chip out a grave 18 inches deep. Not deep enough, but it was all they could manage. Porter said words over the small body wrapped in a blanket they couldn't spare but gave anyway. After the service, Nathaniel found himself standing alone at the 2 graves, staring at the wooden crosses Grant had carved. 2 dead in 13 days, 45 left. The math was simple and terrible. At this rate, they'd all be dead before Christmas. Dr. Winters appeared beside him, hands shoved deep in his pockets. The physician had lost maybe 30 pounds. His face gaunt, his movements slow and careful like an old man, though he was only 56. We need to talk about starvation, Winters said. What it does, what to expect. I know what starvation does. Do you? Because I'm not sure everyone does, and they need to understand what's coming. Winters pulled out a small notebook, the pages filled with his physician's handwriting. I've been tracking symptoms. We're already seeing the early stages. Weakness, obviously. Lethargy. Some people are reporting numbness in their extremities. That's the body shutting down non-essential functions to preserve the core. How long? Nathaniel asked. Until what? Until people start dying. Winters was quiet for a moment. We're on maybe 300 calories a day now. The body needs at minimum 1,200 just to maintain basic function in this cold. So we're running a deficit of 900 calories daily. The body makes up the difference by consuming itself. Fat first, then muscle, then organs. How long, Henry? Most adults can survive total starvation for 40 to 60 days. We're not in total starvation yet, but close. At current rates, we'll start losing people regularly by mid-December. The children first because they have less reserve. then the elderly, then anyone who gets sick or injured because they won't have the resources to heal. Nathaniel looked at the two graves. Emma lasted 42 days. Emma had pneumonia. Without that, she might have made it longer. Winters closed his notebook. I'm telling you this because you need to prepare people. This isn't going to be isolated deaths. This is going to be a cascade, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. That night, Nathaniel called another meeting. Everyone came, even Sarah Mills, who sat in the back holding her 3 remaining children. They looked like ghosts in the lamplight, faces hollow and pale, eyes too large and shrunken faces. We have 4 days of flour left, Nathaniel said. After that, we have nothing. We've hunted every day for 2 weeks and found almost nothing, so we need to talk about alternatives. What alternatives? Grant asked. There's nothing left. Bark, Nathaniel said. Pine bark. The inner layer can be eaten. Also leather, belts, boots, harnesses. We can boil them soft enough to chew. The silence that followed was broken by a woman's laugh, bitter and sharp. We're going to eat our boots. Yes, Nathaniel said simply. That or starve. They spent the next 3 days learning to eat what wasn't food. Nathaniel showed them how to strip pine bark, cutting through the rough outer layer to reach the pale inner cambium that was technically edible. It tasted like wood and turpentine, bitter and astringent, and it took hours of chewing to break down enough to swallow. But it was something to put in their stomachs. The leather was worse. They started with old harnesses and worn-out boots, cutting them into strips and boiling them for hours until the leather softened enough to chew. It had no nutritional value that Nathaniel could detect, but it gave their jaws something to work on, tricked their stomachs into feeling less empty for a few hours. On November 23rd, Porter found a way to set snares using wire from broken wagon wheels. He placed 20 of them in the willows along the creek, baited with small pieces of bark. 2 days later, they caught their first rabbit. 1 rabbit for 45 people. They made soup from it, boiling the entire animal, meat, bones, organs, skin, until the water was cloudy with dissolved protein and fat. Everyone got 4 ounces of broth. It was the first real food they'd had in a week. We need more snares, Porter said, standing with Nathaniel by the fire where the rabbit had cooked. 100, 200. We cover every game trail in this valley. We don't have enough wire. Then we use what we have. Fabric strips, rope, anything that might work. Porter's voice had an edge of desperation that Nathaniel had never heard before. That rabbit bought us maybe one day. One day, Nathaniel. We need more. They set 70 snares over the next week, caught 3 more rabbits and a grouse. The grouse was diseased, its meat gray and foul-smelling, but they ate it anyway. Dr. Winters warned them it might make people sick, but being sick from bad meat was better than dying from no meat at all. Christmas came without anyone marking it. The date meant nothing now. There was only survival, measured in days of bark and leather, in ounces of water boiled from snow, in hours spent huddled around fires that consumed their dwindling woodpile. On December 28th, Thomas Grant's eldest son collapsed while hauling firewood. He was 16 years old, strong and healthy 2 months ago. Now he lay in the snow unable to stand, his legs simply giving out beneath him. It took 3 men to carry him back to his wagon. Dr. Winters examined him and delivered his verdict to Grant and Nathaniel in private. His body has consumed most of its muscle mass. His heart is weakening. Without food, real food, he won't last 2 weeks. What about with food? Grant asked. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. With adequate nutrition, he'd recover. But we don't have adequate nutrition. Grant turned to Nathaniel. You told us 3 days through the pass. You told us we'd be in California by November. You told us... I know what I told you, Nathaniel said. My boy is dying because you were too proud to listen to an Indian. The words hung in the frozen air between them, true and brutal and impossible to argue with. Nathaniel had no defense because there was no defense. Grant was right. I'm sorry, Nathaniel said. Grant stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away, back to the wagon where his son lay dying. New Year's Day, 1848, arrived with temperatures that dropped to 30 below zero. They woke to find 2 more dead, an elderly woman named Martha Crawford and a young man named William Foster, who'd been sick with what Winters called starvation fever. They'd both died in their sleep, which Winters said was a mercy. 4 graves now, 43 people left, 73 days trapped in the valley. Nathaniel stood outside his wagon in the pre-dawn darkness, breathing air so cold it felt like knives in his lungs. Inside, Rebecca was sleeping, or pretending to sleep. She was 5 months pregnant now, and looked like a skeleton with a small round belly. Her face was all angles and shadows, her arms thin as kindling, but the baby was still alive. Winters checked every few days, pressing his ear to her stomach, and always reported the same thing. Heartbeat strong, baby moving. A miracle or a curse? Nathaniel couldn't decide which. Porter found him as the sun rose, painting the snow orange and gold. Beautiful if you could forget that beauty was slowly killing them all. "We need to try again," Porter said without preamble. "For the pass. It's been getting colder, not warmer. There's more snow now than there was in November." "I know, but Thomas Grant is organizing a group. 6 men. They're planning to leave tomorrow, whether you approve or not." Nathaniel turned to look at Porter. "His son died yesterday." "I know, that's why he's going. He says he won't die here waiting. He'd rather die trying." "He'll die in the pass. They all will." "Probably," Porter agreed. "But can you stop them? Should you?" The question sat heavy between them. Nathaniel had led these people into this trap. Did he have any right to keep them here against their will? Even if leaving meant certain death. "I'll talk to him," Nathaniel said. He found Grant at his wagon, packing supplies that didn't exist. A blanket, a knife, a canteen. His son's body was wrapped in canvas, waiting for ground soft enough to bury him. "Don't," Grant said before Nathaniel could speak. "Don't tell me it's suicide. Don't tell me to wait. I've waited 73 days and buried my boy. I'm done waiting." "Who's going with you?" "Miller brothers, Foster's brother, 2 others, 6 total." Grant looked up from his packing. "You could come, lead us. You know the mountains." "I know the mountains well enough to know you won't make it." "Maybe, but at least we'll die doing something instead of sitting here, turning into corpses one day at a time." Grant's voice was bitter but not angry anymore. Just tired. "You want to know the truth, Nathaniel? I don't even care about making it through anymore. I just want to die somewhere other than this valley. Anywhere else. That's all I've got left to want." Nathaniel understood that. God help him, he understood it completely. The valley had become a prison, and even if the bars were made of snow and cold instead of iron, they were just as real. Sometimes he looked at the mountains surrounding them and felt the walls closing in, felt the urge to run, even knowing there was nowhere to run to. "When do you leave?" "Dawn? We'll take the southern approach. Maybe it's less snow that direction." "It's not." "I know," Grant said, "but we're going anyway." Grant's party left on January 2nd at first light. 6 men, each carrying a blanket, a knife, and hope that was more dangerous than the cold. The camp gathered to watch them go, silent witnesses to what everyone knew was a death march. The men waded into chest-deep snow and disappeared into the timber within minutes. Nathaniel gave them 3 days. They made it 2. The first one came back on January 3rd, frostbitten and delirious, having turned around after a single night out. His name was Peter Chen, a carpenter from Pennsylvania, and both his feet were frozen solid. Dr. Winters looked at them and shook his head. "They'll have to come off, both of them, above the ankle." "Without anesthetic." Chen's voice was thin and high. "I have nothing to give you. Nothing for pain. Nothing to prevent infection after." Winters met Chen's eyes. "I'm sorry, but if we don't take them, gangrene will kill you in a week." They did the surgery in Winters' wagon with 4 men holding Chen down. Nathaniel stood outside listening to the screaming until finally there was silence. Chen had passed out. They cauterized the stumps with a red-hot knife. The smell of burning flesh hung in the frozen air. On January 5th, 2 more men returned. The Miller brothers, both in bad shape but alive. They'd made it 1.5 miles in 3 days before turning back. Their report was simple. The snow was worse than November, packed hard by wind, impossible to move through. They'd seen no sign of Grant or the other 2 men. "They kept going," the younger Miller said. His name was David, and he was 24 years old, though he looked 50 now. Thomas said he'd rather freeze in the past than come back here, so they kept going, up the slope. We watched them until we couldn't see them anymore. On January 8th, a storm moved in. 3 days of heavy snow and wind that screamed across the valley like something alive and furious. The temperature dropped to 40 below. They huddled in their wagons, burning furniture now because the firewood was gone, and waited for the storm to pass. When it cleared on January 11th, there was another 3 feet of snow on the ground. The valley looked different, the familiar landmarks buried or changed. The wagons were now just humps in the snow, barely visible. To move between them required tunneling. Grant and the other 2 men never came back. Nathaniel organized a search party despite knowing it was futile. They found nothing. No tracks, no bodies, no sign anyone had ever tried to cross the southern approach. The new snow had erased everything. Grant and his companions had simply ceased to exist, swallowed by the mountains that did not care about their desperation or their courage or their grief. That night, Nathaniel updated his count. 7 dead now. 36 left. 82 days trapped. The math was relentless. They were dying faster than they could adapt. At this rate, none of them would see April. Rebecca found him sitting alone by a fire made from a chair they'd brought from Missouri. She sat beside him, her pregnant belly pressing against her thin frame like an accusation. "Tell me we're going to make it," she said. Nathaniel looked at her and couldn't lie. "I don't know." Porter came to him on January 15th with an idea that was either genius or madness. Probably both. "The oxen," Porter said. "We need to slaughter the oxen." They were standing outside in air so cold it hurt to breathe, watching the animals that had pulled their wagons 2,000 miles. There were 8 oxen left, down from the original 16. Half had been slaughtered early on for meat that had sustained them through November. The other half they'd kept alive, thinking they'd need them to pull the wagons out come spring. "We need them to leave," Nathaniel said. "We need to be alive to leave." Porter's voice was urgent. "Look at them, Nathaniel. They're starving just like us. We're feeding them bark and pine needles, and they're dying anyway. Better to slaughter them now while there's still meat on them." Nathaniel looked at the oxen. Porter was right. The animals were skeletal, ribs showing through their hides, heads hanging low. They were dying slowly, consuming resources without providing anything in return. 8 oxen, Porter continued. Maybe 800 pounds of meat each. That's 6,000 pounds total. Enough to feed everyone for weeks, maybe months if we're careful. And in spring, when we need to move the wagons, we'll pull them ourselves if we have to. Or we'll leave them, walk out. But none of that matters if we're all dead before the thaw. Porter grabbed Nathaniel's arm. "We're at the breaking point. You know it. I know it. 2 more people died last night. You haven't announced it yet, but I saw Winters carry the bodies out. That's 9 dead. We're losing 1 every 4 days now. This rate keeps up. We'll all be gone by March." Nathaniel pulled free and walked away, needing to think. But Porter was right, and they both knew it. The math was simple. 8 oxen meant survival. Keeping them meant maintaining a false hope of normalcy, of somehow pulling wagons out of this valley when spring came. He found Dr. Winters with the 2 new bodies, an elderly man named Jacob Pierce and a young woman named Ann Foster, widow of the man who'd died weeks earlier. Both had simply stopped breathing during the night. Starvation had finally exhausted their body's ability to continue. "How many more?" Nathaniel asked. Winters looked up from where he was wrapping Ann's body. "Before we're all gone, at current rates, we have maybe 60 days, 70 if we're lucky." He stood up, joints creaking. "But that's without accounting for disease, injury, or the cold getting worse. Real number, probably 45 days, maybe less. Porter wants to slaughter the oxen. Then do it, today." Winter's voice was flat and certain. "Those animals represent the difference between dying in February and maybe living until April. And April means the thaw. It means rescue. It means this ends." Nathaniel looked at the 2 wrapped bodies. 9 dead, 34 left. 85 days trapped. He found Porter and said 2 words. "Do it." They slaughtered all 8 oxen over the next 2 days. It was brutal work in 40 below temperatures. The men too weak to do it efficiently. The animals too starved to provide much meat. But when it was done, they had roughly 4,000 pounds of beef, frozen solid, stored in snow. The beef saved them. For 3 weeks, they ate real food again. Not much, 6 ounces per person per day, carefully rationed, but enough to stop the dying. The children's faces filled out slightly. The adults stopped looking quite so much like walking corpses. Dr. Winters reported that the decline had stabilized, but beef couldn't fix everything. On February 4th, Rebecca collapsed while melting snow for water. Nathaniel found her lying in the snow outside their wagon, unconscious, her lips blue with cold. He carried her inside, screaming for Winters, terrified in a way he hadn't been even when facing the blocked pass. Winters came immediately. He examined Rebecca while Nathaniel stood frozen, useless, watching his wife's shallow breathing and thinking about the baby. 6 months pregnant now. The baby was due in 3 months, if they lived that long. Her body is shutting down, Winters said quietly. The pregnancy is consuming resources she doesn't have. She needs rest, complete rest, and more food. How much more? Double what she's getting now. Minimum. The baby needs calories to develop properly. Without them, both of them are at risk. Nathaniel did the math automatically. Double rations for Rebecca meant less for everyone else, meant the beef would run out sooner. But what choice was there? Let his wife and unborn child die to stretch supplies another week. She gets double, Nathaniel said. That night he announced the decision to the camp. Some people nodded, understanding. Others looked away, resentful. Sarah Mills, who'd lost a daughter and now watched her 3 remaining children waste away, stared at Nathaniel with something close to hatred. My children are starving, she said, but your wife gets extra because she's pregnant. We're all suffering. Why does she deserve more? Because she's carrying a baby, because 2 lives hang on those calories instead of 1. Nathaniel's voice was steady, but he felt the injustice of it. She was right. They were all starving, but he couldn't let Rebecca die, couldn't let his child die before it even drew breath. Fair would be all of us dying equally, Porter said, stepping forward. But we're not interested in fair. We're interested in survival. And that means making hard choices about who gets what. Rebecca gets extra rations, that's decided. The meeting broke up in bitter silence. Nathaniel knew he'd lost something that night. Not leadership exactly, but moral authority. The unspoken agreement that he was doing his best for everyone equally. Now he was just another man trying to save his own family. Rebecca recovered over the next few days, gaining back some strength. The baby kept growing, kept moving. Winters said both were stable, but the cost hung over Nathaniel like a judgment. On February 10th, they hit the century mark. 100 days trapped in the valley. 34 people left. The beef would last maybe another month at current rations, less if they increased anyone else's share. After that, nothing but bark and leather again. Spring felt impossibly far away. The snow showed no signs of melting. The cold remained brutal, and every day Nathaniel watched his people get weaker despite the beef, watched the light fade from their eyes as hope became harder to sustain. The thaw started on March 15th. Not a dramatic melting, but small signs that winter was finally losing its grip. The temperature climbed to 35 degrees during the day, dropping back below freezing at night. Water dripped from pine branches. The top layer of snow turned soft and granular. Nathaniel stood outside his wagon watching ice fall from the trees, listening to the sound of dripping water, and felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Porter joined him, both men staring at the mountains where patches of dark rock were beginning to show through the snow. How long? Porter asked. Until the pass clears. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Nathaniel did the math in his head. Mid-April at the earliest. More likely early May. We have beef for 3 more weeks. After that, we're back to bark and leather. But we're close. We made it through the worst. Had they? Nathaniel wasn't sure. They'd lost 11 people. 23 remained. The deaths had slowed once they'd slaughtered the oxen, but people were still dying. 2 more in the past week. A young boy with fever and an older woman whose heart simply gave out. The survivors were hollow versions of their former selves. Nathaniel had lost maybe 60 pounds. Porter looked skeletal. The children were worse, their bodies consuming themselves to stay alive. Even with the beef, they were all slowly starving. Just slower than before, but the snow was melting. That had to mean something. Over the next 2 weeks, they watched spring creep into the valley. The snow level dropped from 6 feet to 5, then to 4. The creek emerged from its ice cover, running fast and loud. Green shoots appeared in the meadow where the snow had melted. The deer returned, moving down from higher elevations, and suddenly there was game to hunt. Nathaniel and Porter killed a buck on March 28th, a real deer, not a half-starved rabbit, 140 pounds of meat. They brought it back to camp, and people wept at the sight of it. Fresh meat, spring meat, the taste of survival. They rationed it carefully, stretching it over 10 days combined with the last of the beef. And they hunted every day, managing to kill 3 more deer before the beef ran out completely. The hunting was still hard, the men still weak, but possible now in ways it hadn't been in the deepest winter. On April 1st, exactly 5 months after they'd entered the valley, Dr. Winters made his announcement. The pass should be crossable in 2 weeks, maybe less if this warm spell holds. 2 weeks, 14 days. They had food for maybe that long if they hunted successfully. If they didn't, they'd be eating bark again for the final stretch. But the end was visible now. Real and close enough to touch. That night, for the first time in months, there was laughter in the camp. Quiet and fragile, but real. Children played in the slush. Adults talked about California, about the life waiting for them below, about putting this nightmare behind them. Nathaniel sat with Rebecca, his hand on her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant now. The baby would be born soon, maybe before they escaped, maybe after. But born alive, if they were lucky. Born into a world that wasn't this frozen valley. "We're going to make it," Rebecca said. This time, Nathaniel believed her. On April 12th, Nathaniel and Porter made the climb to check the pass. The snow had melted dramatically in 2 weeks, dropping from 4 feet to maybe 18 inches in the valley, less on the slopes where the sun hit directly. The temperature was holding in the 40s during the day, and the sound of rushing meltwater was constant. They reached the pass at midday. The wall of snow that had blocked them in November was gone, melted down to a manageable slope. Beyond it, they could see the trail descending toward the foothills, still snow-covered but passable. Actually passable. "We can do this," Porter breathed. 3 days, maybe 4, and we're down in the valley. Nathaniel studied the route, his guide's eye measuring distances and difficulties. The trail was visible in places, buried in others. There would be sections where they'd have to break trail through deep snow. The wagons were impossible. They'd have to walk out, carrying what they could. But it was doable. Finally, after 5.5 months, it was doable. "We leave in 3 days, Nathaniel decided. April 15th. That gives everyone time to prepare, to rest up. We take only what we can carry, leave everything else." They climbed back down to camp and delivered the news. The reaction was muted. People were too exhausted for celebration, too damaged by months of starvation and cold. But there was relief, visible, palpable relief. The next 3 days were spent preparing. They sorted through possessions, deciding what to keep and what to abandon. Nathaniel and Rebecca packed one small trunk between them. Everything else, furniture, books, Rebecca's china from her mother, stayed in the wagon. It didn't matter anymore. Only survival mattered. Dr. Winters moved through camp, checking everyone's fitness for the journey. His verdict was grim. "Half these people are too weak to make it, the children especially. We're going to lose more before we reach the bottom. Can we wait longer? Let them build up strength." "With what food? We're out of beef. The hunting is unpredictable. Every day we wait is another day of starvation." Winters shook his head. "We go now or we don't go at all." On the evening of April 14, they held a service for the 13 who had died. Porter led it, standing beside the row of graves that marked their 5 months in the valley. He read from Psalms and Corinthians, his voice strong despite his emaciated frame. "We do not forget those who fell here," Porter said. Samuel Weber, Emma Mills, Thomas Grant and his son, all of them. They are part of this place now, and we carry their memory with us into whatever comes next. People wept, not loud, wailing grief, but quiet tears that acknowledged both loss and survival. They were leaving 13 behind, but 23 were walking out. More than half had made it. Given where they'd been in February, that felt like a miracle. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. He lay beside Rebecca, listening to her breathe, feeling the baby move under his hand. Tomorrow they would leave this valley that had been prison and home for 165 days. Tomorrow they would walk toward California and everything it represented. If they made it, if the trail held, if no one died on the way down. Too many ifs. But for the first time since October, the ifs felt like possibilities instead of impossibilities. They left the valley on April 15th at dawn. 23 people walking in single file through snow that ranged from ankle deep to waist deep depending on the terrain. Nathaniel led, breaking trail. Porter brought up the rear, making sure no one fell behind. They covered maybe 2 miles the first day. 2 miles that should have taken an hour took them from sunrise to sunset. The weakest struggled with every step. Children had to be carried. Rebecca, 8 months pregnant and emaciated, moved slowly but steadily, refusing help until Nathaniel insisted she lean on his arm. They camped that first night on the trail, huddled around fires made from deadfall pine, eating the last of their venison. Above them, the mountains rose black against stars that were finally visible, without the constant overcast of winter storms. "We're out," Porter said, sitting beside Nathaniel. "We're actually out. We're not out until we're down." But Nathaniel felt it too. The psychological weight of the valley was lifting. They were moving, making progress. Every step was distance between them and that frozen prison. The second day was harder. The trail descended steeply in places, slick with meltwater. An older man named Joseph Hart slipped and tumbled 30 feet down a slope, breaking his leg. They splinted it with pine branches, but he couldn't walk. 2 men had to carry him, which slowed everyone down. They made maybe a mile and a half. On the third day, Sarah Mill's youngest child, a boy of 4 named Benjamin, simply stopped walking. He sat down in the snow and refused to move, too exhausted to continue. Sarah tried everything, coaxing, pleading, threatening, but the boy wouldn't stand. His legs were done. Nathaniel picked him up and carried him. The child weighed maybe 25 pounds. Should have been easy, but Nathaniel's body was so depleted that even that small weight was agony. His legs trembled, his back screamed, but he carried the boy for 3 hours before Porter insisted on taking a turn. They reached the foothills on the 4th day. The snow was gone, replaced by muddy ground and new grass. The temperature was in the 60s. They could see the Sacramento Valley spreading out below them, green and impossible and beautiful. "One more day," Nathaniel told the group. "One more day and we're down." That night, Joseph Hart, the man with the broken leg, died in his sleep. His body had simply given up. The injury and starvation and months of cold finally too much. They buried him in a shallow grave under a pine tree, the 14th to die. On April 19th, 173 days after entering the mountains, 22 survivors walked into a settlement called Johnson's Ranch. Farmers and miners stopped their work to stare at the skeletal figures stumbling down the road. Women brought food and water. Men offered blankets and shelter. Nathaniel stood in the settlement center, surrounded by people asking questions he couldn't answer yet, and felt his legs give out. He sat down hard in the dirt, Rebecca beside him, and finally let himself believe it. They'd made it. Against mathematics and mountains and the brutal indifference of winter, they'd survived. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and share it. It helps the next person find their way here.